Howdy, y'all. Welcome back to another episode of Rednecks Rising, the rowdiest revolutionary podcast where we cover all the things about Appalachia's anti-racist, anti-capitalist, anti-fascist history and happenings throughout the hollers today. My name is Chelsea, and I am your guide on this bumpy and brilliant ride together. I'm rooted and raised in the Great Smoky Mountains, where I've been a community organizer for just over a decade now. I am not a professional podcaster, journalist, or content creator. My background's actually in social work with a focus on community. I make this podcast for shits and giggles as a working class mom after I get off work from my day job inside of the nonprofit industrial complex that helps me to survive this capitalist hellscape. In fact, this entire podcast is independently produced, and today's episode is brought to you by Black History Month, anti-racist educators, staying hydrated, finally securing a stable schedule for childcare support, our amazing podcast community, our actual community, both in real life and online, and state legislators that just don't know when to stop committing crimes against humanity. In today's episode, we sit down with the brilliant and beloved anti-racist counselor, coach, and community builder, Desiree B. Stevens. Although Desiree isn't a formal Appalachian, I would like to petition the Council of Appalachia to please initiate her as an adopted member of our community, because I've been following Desiree for well over a year now, and I've been a member of her online community, Makeshift Happen, since last fall. And I've gained and learned so much from the wisdom, compassion, and practical exercises that she shares through her various platforms. Give today's episode a listen, and then let me know if you agree and how you would like to cast your vote on behalf of Desiree's Appalachian membership application. During our conversation, Desiree and I weave a thread that starts by touching on both of our personal stories and how we stumbled into this work at the intersection of racial capitalism. Desiree's key framing is, who were you before you were white? Which is the framing she brings into our conversation and her work at large as an Irish Black woman in America. Desiree's work centers healing, as in ancestral healing and personal healing. In her own words, she says, it's all shadow work. Her work resonates so strongly with the work that I've done over the years, so our conversation takes off naturally. We dig deep into the impact of hierarchy under white supremacist capitalism and lateral violence between poor white folks and poor Black folks and poor Indigenous folks and other folks of color. We explore the importance of taking back our power as the collective and ridding ourselves of the shame that comes from being at the bottom of this hierarchy that we've inherited but that we haven't consented to. As I was editing this episode and listening to it, towards the end, Desiree makes some points that just knocked me down. They stuck out to me at this moment in my life in particular. Desiree talks about how, as we get more access to money and climb up the hierarchy of success under white supremacist capitalism, we actually lose access to the abundance of community. It really hit home how true this sentence is, especially right now for me. As I've mentioned in the last couple of episodes, my partner re-entered the workforce at the beginning of this year for the first time since our kiddo was born in 2020. And you might think that we would be thriving now that we are living on two incomes instead of just one that we had been living on for the 3 years before now. But with that second income also comes so many conditions and stipulations. We have to pay $800 a month for childcare in order for my partner to be able to work in the first place. We have so much less time and capacity for each other because when we both aren't working, we're taking care of all of our responsibilities as parents and, quote, adults, end quote, and doing all of the things that we can't do when we're both working, grocery shopping, cleaning, showering, cooking, whatever. We have so much less time for connections, so much less patience because we're both being pulled so thin. And over the last few days in particular, I've just been feeling a strong mix of rage and grief. We deserve and need our village, our community to support each other and get through this. That's how it's meant to be. We're not meant to try and survive this as nuclear family units, as single parents all on our own, as isolated individuals. And this hierarchy, this system, this white supremacist capitalist scam stole our village from us. It stole our community. And I'm just really feeling the weight of that today. And you probably will too after hearing what Desiree has to say. What's funny is that I had actually recorded this episode before the end of 2022, and the way that episodes are recorded and scheduled for the show, in particular the interview episodes, I don't publish them typically until a few weeks after we sit down to record. This episode had initially been planned to launch last week, and I ended up pushing it back since the episodes have been running a little late, and totally unplanned, it serendipitously landed so that it happens to be the first episode of Black History Month for the Rednecks Rising podcast, which feels so very aligned in the most beautiful of ways. And I can't think of a better person to kick off our Black History Month together than Desiree. I hope that this episode does justice to our Black listeners, our Black neighbors, our Black friends and family and comrades who deserve so much more than a month. And I would really appreciate it if all of our listeners out there could pay a visit to Desiree's supporter page. Like us, she has a Ko-Fi, an alternative to Patreon, and her link is ko, like knockout, fi.com/Desiree B. Stevens, which is spelled Desiree, B as in boy, Stephen's. And I'm going to drop that link in the show notes for today's episode as well. Make sure to throw some love Desiree's way in honor of this month and in recognition of the abundance of offerings that she brings to the world. You can make a one-time contribution, you can become a monthly supporter of hers, or you can invest in specific services and offerings all over there on her Ko-Fi or on her website, which is DesireeBStevens.com. And before we jump into this week's juicy episode, I want to give a shout out to our latest supporter over on our Ko-Fi page for the podcast. This time, it's a shout out to our friend, Lori. Thanks so much for your support, Lori. You're the bomb. We appreciate you. And if you are listening to this and you want to be one of the cool kids like Lori and get a shout out of your own on the show, you can also support us at ko-fi.com/rednecksrising, rednecks as in plural, and help keep this podcast alive and well, along with whatever joy and validation it might bring, even when we're fighting against the impending existential crisis under the state of conditions that we're being forced to live in. Another great way to help the podcast is to share us with your friends, of course, and reach out to us. We are looking to schedule interview episodes with more of our Appalachian besties up and down the mountain range. In particular, we want to use this platform to amplify Appalachians who hold other underrepresented identities, like Black Appalachians, Indigenous Appalachians, queer and trans Appalachians, and other Appalachians of color. You can always hit us up on social media or via email. Our email is rednecksrising@gmail.com. We want to hear from you. And for our current events segment today, the world is burning. Capitalism is holding on to its dying breath. Fascism is on the rise, and I absolutely fucking hate it here. That's it. That's the current events. Also, you guys have other podcasts that cover current events, so I don't think I need to do that on every episode, and I really just don't want to today. There's a lot of not happy news, and I also am I sitting down to finally wrap up editing this episode at 7:30 p.m. on Wednesday after I promised you that it would be out yesterday? Yes, absolutely. Yes, I am. So with that said, let's dive right in to the episode and give Desiree a warm Rednecks Rising welcome.
Good morning.
I'm so excited to be here with you. Finally, the stars aligned.
I know. It's been a while, right? It's really me. I'm really I'm like, okay, yeah. Life just happens and now we're here. So I'm very excited. I find you to be, I love the youth. I love it. I love where you guys are going with it. So I'm super happy to be here.
Thank you. I'm super honored to be here with you because I, feel just like the universe, or really the algorithm, I guess, brought your content to me, and I'm obsessed with it, and I learn so much from you all the time. So I'm really excited to be able to amplify that for others to be able to learn from you too.
I appreciate that. And it's smoking allowed because it's like 1987 in my life.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's no rules here. Yeah.
Love it. So I could curse all of that. Great. Yay. I'm in the happy place. One of my desires is to do a photo shoot like Andrew Dice Clay. You would not know who Andrew Dice Clay is, maybe, but was a horrible comedian, but funny for the time because there was no nothing. But anyway, he wore like this really slick back hair and like leather jacket. And he was like very the Fonz kind of attitude. And he always had a cigarette. So,
oh my gosh, you would look smoking in a photo shoot with like,
I feel like I would.
the greaser look and like the cigarette. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm going to do that. So anyway, I'll let you do your intros and all that stuff.
Oh, no. So I'll record an intro separately. I can edit anything, by the way. So if there's anything that like I say and you're like, Chelsea, that didn't come out the way that you wanted it to, or if there's anything that you say that you're like, I don't know if I want that in there, just let me know. And yeah, otherwise, like I'll like keep our little small talk for a fade in, like fancy.
No,
and otherwise,
nice. I don't have those skills.
I had to sell. I'm a Capricorn through and through. So I was like, I am going to learn how to do all of this so that I can do it well.
Yeah, no, when people get my podcast, they get what the fuck was recorded. And that's it. Like, it's raw conversation, baby. Here
raw.
You go.
I love it. Yeah. I don't typically edit like the actual contents unless it's something that someone's like if an organizer is like, oh, that was strategy I don't want out there in the world. Can you like take that out? But the rest of it's really candid. So
love it.
Yeah. So what were you hoping to touch on today?
I really just was like, I was interested in like you doing whatever it is that you do. Like ask me questions. What are my thoughts on these things? Just really it's you. I'm here on your podcast, right? Like
okay.
However, wherever you want to go, I am open and willing.
Okay. So typically my podcast is like I interview other Appalachians who are doing like either mutual aid work or organizing on the ground, like abortion access, any of that kind of stuff. But I think I am especially interested in like having you talk a little bit about the work that you do because it does align with like basically, so a little backstory about me because we know each other, but we haven't like gotten to have a one-on-one or anything
right
yet. So I've been a community organizer for a decade and have always been poor, which is why I ended up being a community organizer because everyone I know has been killed by poverty at one point or another.
Correct.
And I entered organizing through electoral politics and was like, oh, elections are going to save us. We elect the right person and
oh, the joys of youth.
That was 2012. I've learned a lot since then. Right. And so I started doing this thing called deep canvassing where basically you knock on every door instead of targeting specific people and you ask really about their own experiences and what keeps them awake at night. And that having conversations with other poor white folks who
love that
regurgitate problematic narratives that they have heard from Fox News. But when I have like sat with them and elicited their their experiences in our conversations, have like witnessed them move through cognitive dissonance to realize who is really responsible for their problems being the people up here rather than like poor brown people. And like that experience that's what opened my eyes to being like, oh, white supremacist capitalism is fucking traumatizing all of us right now. And my goal in this work, like I never set out to be like, oh, I'm going to make like anti-racist Appalachian content. So when I first started the podcast, I was going to do an episode on Blair Mountain. And because of my flavor of ADHD and autism, I was like, oh, but I have to know what happened before that. So why did Blair Mountain happen? And then there was a protest before that. And I was like, okay, but why did those protests happen? And eventually I ended up at colonization and being like, oh, this country was colonized as a whole corporate venture. So that's like the beginning of everything. And so then stumbling on your content, it was very much so like the universe was like, yes, you are on the right path, learning about the correct things and putting the pieces together.
I love that.
And so I would love to hear about like your story and a little bit about like your background and how you ended up starting Makeshift Happen and maybe we should even start with like an intro for the folks who haven't heard of you before.
Okay, yeah, cool. I'm Desiree B. Stevens. I host an online healing community. It's hella intersectional. It's called Makeshift Happen. We do workshops, group counseling together. We are deconstructing whiteness, decolonizing all of the things, and trying to help people reconnect back to like pre-colonial things, right? My famous quote that has gone like TikTok famous is like, who were you before you were white? Because this is my conversation, like, right? You understand poor white people. I understand poor white people. I was raised by poor white people, right? So that's my background. I am Irish and Black, and I'm like, that should just say enough in regard to like the violence that we have experienced on both sides of me, right? Like, because we only think about colonization here in this country and never about Europe. And it's like, how do you think that you became white? Like, all of the stripping that happened in Europe and then came to these shores. And then when they started kidnapping and trafficking Africans over, they were like, ooh, how do we separate ourselves from these people? Oh, we'll call ourselves white. That didn't happen until the 1600s. There were no white people before like 1619 ever. And this is like an awakening for white people that they're like, what? And I'm like, yeah, like you've been colonized for a very, very, very long time. So when you see all this pushback from indigenous people, from Black people and other people of color, it's because it's new for us, right? We're like, no, 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 no. We don't want to forget. We don't want to do that. So that's pretty much what I do, is just decolonization counseling and anti-racism education. And I did not start out like you with the idea of doing that, right? Like I started talking on TikTok like everybody else. It was 2020 and we were all bored in the house, and I'm in the house bored. I jumped on that. Me and the kids were like doing all the dances, we're having all the fun. And then there was a trend, a sound on TikTok, and it was like, I'm from the hood though, like the hood though, like really, really, really from the hood though, right? And I used that sound about Biden. When I was like, why I'm not voting for Biden. And I was like, because I'm from the hood. Like, and we know what his 47 years of very racist policies did to the hood, and goes back super far, right? Like, it's just a whole bunch of stuff. So that got people like asking me questions. And then I started talking about ancestral healing for white people and went viral. And I just started answering questions because I like to talk to people. I think that lived experiences are super necessary. And I think in diversity, equity, and inclusion work, far too often the hood gets left out of it, and poor white people. As you know, like when white women, liberal, quite often, progressive feminists that are middle class, they're like, oh yeah, we left every other woman behind. I'm like, you left poor white women behind. Like, don't worry about what's going on with Black people. Like, figure out what's going on in your community. Why could you look at someone who's white and call them trash? And this should be your family. These should be your folks. These are your people. White poor women don't have access to abortions. They are in food deserts. They don't have medical care. And you don't give a damn because you moved up in that hierarchy of whiteness and forgot about everybody else. And that's pretty much how now I find myself in like Yolidarity TikTok. Like they're like, yes, she's right. What are you talking about? And then like to your point, like anti-racism work is super important. And you'll find that you wind up becoming an anti-racist educator in your own right, because like anti-Blackness and racism runs America.
Yeah, it's at the core. It's like impossible to get away from.
Yeah, it's the core. It's like, let me tell you, like right-wing conservatives, like we could get together and tear this whole thing down if they weren't racist. Like, it's like, I'm like, that's why I tell people your racism and your anti-Blackness is what's stopping your liberation.
Yep. And hurting all of us in the process, themselves included. Yep. Oh, yes. So how long has Makeshift happen? This came through your pandemic?
No, that actually happened before then.
Okay, right? So tell me about that.
Okay, so I started a Facebook group like around 2014 called Social Matters. And it was born out of, next door Facebook neighborhood groups. And I'm like, you guys are racist as fuck. Oh no. They have all the yard signs and stuff in my neighborhood. Black Lives Matter. I got Black friends. I'm cool with my Black neighbor. They come to my house, all of this. And I'm like, y'all are still racist as hell. So they encouraged me to start my own page. Like, if you want to have these discussions, I was like, and you know what? You're right. And I will. So I started them. And then someone that ran a network over here in my area volunteered their building space. And I would be like, come have these meetings and let's have these conversations. So that's pretty much how that started. And then I wanted to get off of Facebook because I constantly get blocked. Right. Having these conversations, you get banned. And that's fine because that's the legal right of a private business to operate in this country. So I was like, cool. So I took it off app and I went to Mighty Networks and started it there, where there's no algorithm. You see every single thing that's posted by every single person. You don't have to edit yourself. No content warnings or any of that shit. And that's how it was born. And it just keeps expanding. Like we make groups for every single thing that we need. Like, oh, you need disability support? Got somebody for that. It's a very good peer-led space, right? Like with people that are doing this work in various ways. Like we have a grief support group because this is trauma work and this is grief. We have somatics group. We have inner child's group. We have, white parents with Black kids. It's there to serve the needs of the community. And eventually, hopefully, fingers crossed, for 2023, I can get some land and start having physical space so I could do healing retreats and educational stuff on the property, right? And people can come and stay and chill and talk. It's like an educational hippie commune.
Yes. And it's so like community is that you can't do this work alone or in a vacuum.
Nope.
So that's just so important. And community is, that's why I'm a community organizer. I was raised by a village. My mom was a single mom. Like community is family to me. Like I don't have this idea of like nuclear family. It's just community.
Right.
And so like that piece of your work, and then the other piece of your work that resonates so strongly with me, because now that I finished my social work program, my graduate program in 2018. And ever since like I was in grad school, I've considered myself like a community, like healing organizer, not like community, just political organizer. And when I pulled up your website for the first time to join the community and saw it's all shadow work, I was like, this is just Desiree is human. I love her.
Thank you.
When did that is there a story behind that realization of like, it's all shadow work for you?
There's always a story. So, yes, in my own. So what's interesting is like in my own deconstruction of my own whiteness, right? Because people like very specifically, if you are mixed, like what people don't understand is like whiteness is a system. It has nothing to do with your skin. They just leverage your skin for the upper 1%, right? Like that's it. It is a whiteness. White just means socioeconomics and a political stance. That's it. There's nothing else inside of that. And then they just use white skinned people to hoard all of the power and resources. That's it, right? So when I could go back to college and 18 and Christ, I was like a whole white ass Republican. You know what I'm saying? Like bad, like hardcore, right? Like I believed in fucking trickle down economic. Like,
oh no,
girl, it was terrible. I was so white. And I don't even understand because I wasn't raised that way, right? Like my mom was like Irish and held on to being Irish. She's first generation. She was always in the community. She was working with the Rainbow Coalition in the South Bronx. She worked with the Salvation Army. My mom died an HIV/AIDS activist, right? Like as a counselor and everything. My own self, I worked on like the first AIDS quilt. I worked on the health outreach to teens in my teens, handing out clean needles, like dental dams, finger cuts. I grew up like that, right? Like I realize how insidious it is, right? Like having still though, right? Like though this person was this container, and put me in these positions to do this as young as like 13, 14, and in between like foster care and juvenile detention centers because of my bad behavior, that whiteness still creeped in, like of how it's supposed to be. Slavery was so long ago. What are all of those things, all of that violent rhetoric that is of whiteness. So I took a journey my own self. A friend of mine, Jason, pointed out to me at 28. He was like, "You are white." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" Right? I'm
Look
like,
at
what?
me.
Like, have you seen me? Obviously, I'm not white, right? Like, you never think about being Black until you need to think about being Black. You're just Black. Like, I'm Black. Like, that's obvious. And we were passing out at that time. We had an A&R company. I rep Noble City, and we were having an event. And here in Atlanta, they have this thing called creative loafing. And I was like, "Oh, cool! It's free. Let's put our stuff inside of there." And he was like, "What? No, you can't do that." I was like, "Why not?" Right? Like, and now I'm canvassing and doing this with two Black men. And he's like, "Because like the police could ask you, why are you in that box?" Like, there's like we're trying to lessen police interaction. And I'm like, fuck them. Like, so what? Like, it's free. It's free. Like, just all of the like the blindness that whiteness gives you. Right. Like, to how that would impact them. And so that began my journey. And you see me now at 43. This is why I do not believe that white people should be leading anti-racist stuff, because it took me that long to really fully grasp it all and see all the parts at play and like, oh, wow. So that's what made me realize it was shadow work. And in 2017, I started my counseling service, which was selenite and sage. And it was all woo woo and, like all of that kind of stuff. Like, let's dive into the shadow work. And then white women witches ruined that, like, because I was like, I do not want to be associated with these people who bought their first deck and did all of these things. So I was like, okay, how does this evolve? And that is pretty much the evolution of how we got to make shifts happen and how I became apparently an anti-racist educator. Like, cool. Okay, I'm here for it.
But I feel like, I mean, this is at least the way that my life has gone, is that like most of the time I haven't planned where I've ended up when I've felt the most aligned, if that makes sense. Like, the universe has like even community organizing, I had never heard of community organizing in my life. And the universe it was like the way that I ended up even stumbling. Like, I come from the like, we don't talk about politics or religion at the dinner table kind of family, like,
right.
And I just happened to be and the reason I ended up in electoral politics is I was turning 18 the year of Obama's reelection campaign, and had a family member who was killed by the for-profit healthcare industry. And of course, like that year, and of course, the center of Obama's campaign was healthcare, right? And so it was like, oh, these pieces started like clicking together for me. And then I was in a social work intro course where there's like this professional code of ethics. And one of them is solving social problems, not just helping people. And that is like when it started to click. And I was like, oh, there's something more here. Like, I've got to figure this out. And eventually was doing most just like unpaid community organizing, like rogue underground, probably the equivalent of your Facebook group, but just like in person here in Western North Carolina. And that led me to like getting hired to actually be a community organizer after I'd been waiting tables for years, et cetera. And it was like the universe was just like, the more I leaned in to the things that just like felt aligned with my values, that were like calling to me in my own healing, it's like the faster the snowball started to roll, because, and it was, none of it was planned. I wasn't like, oh, I'm gonna, 10 years start a podcast about Appalachian community organizing.
Yeah, I think that if you just kind of consistently stay in the flow and in alignment, right? Like, when we're talking about, pardon me, when we're talking about like whiteness as a system, you start looking at everything, right? Because poor white people get stopped. Everybody stops at their level of the oppression, right? It's like, we need class solidarity. Yeah, can't get to that until you're not racist. Like, can't trust you not to like bring your uncle, the Klan guy, right? Like, so it's like everybody, white women stop at patriarchy. Gay people, very specifically gay white people, stop at gay rights. And it's like, here's something. Black people exist in every single one of the groups that you're trying to liberate.
Yep.
If you were anti-racism, you would have liberation. So that is like, for me, the key. And what I try to center is like the most unambiguously Black person in any group that you're talking about, right? So because of that, when I kind of come across it, it's just, it just keeps like aligning. Like, yes, like you keep getting into the meat of it. Like, oh, no, like, right, like, not me. Don't center me. Because I look like the palatable Negro. I look like the Black person they want speaking, right? But there's somebody much darker with a much coilier curl, like with deeper features, that is going to suffer more underneath these systems. And that is something that is key for anybody, in my opinion, doing the work, is to center that person and usually make them a child, because children are just, Yolanda from Parenting Decolonized, she talks about that a lot. Like, children are the most oppressed. So like when people are thinking about their work, like even if it's like how we did it, like it happens organically. But if people are listening and they want to think about getting into this work, or they're already doing the work, what I tell people is, one, to always do what you have the capacity to do, right? I show up on TikTok every day because I like it. Like, I enjoy it. I have the capacity for it. And what you could do consistently. It's why you'll never see me at a protest. I can't walk that far. Like, I can't deal with the aggression because like that's just going to make me aggressive. And it's all of those things. So you find what you have the capacity for, what you can do consistently, and center the most unambiguously Black, queer, trans, disabled child. And if you keep that person in your mind, like they exist, that person exists. Think about how these systems impact them, meet their needs, and everyone else's needs would be met.
Yep.
And that's, for me, how I just kind of stay in the alignment and the flow, and just, it allows the work to evolve.
Yeah. And I think that what you're talking about is reminding me, I just had an interview, I haven't published it yet, but with one of my really good friends who is blind, visually impaired. And we were talking about the curb cut effect. Are you familiar with that idea?
I'm not.
So it's the idea of, I just learned about it recently, the idea of sidewalks where they have that curb cut right by the crosswalk, and it's technically made for folks in wheelchairs, but it benefits everybody, right? It benefits folks who are pushing strollers, who are pushing dollies, who just like don't want to step down because maybe they have poor depth perception or something like that. And if we, like, what I hear you describing is like that on a social level for the most marginalized and oppressed folks, and we all benefit from it.
Right. That's how you meet everybody's needs, like, because people consistently question that. I'm like, it's really simple, right? It's, for me, I like the curb effect. For me, it's like, I always think about, like, I always heard about, you're only as strong as your weakest link.
Yes. Yep.
Right. And how do you shore up the weakest link? Like that's it. Like, if that link, that's it. You're as strong as what's holding you on. So it's like, make sure that the most marginalized person globally, right? Like, thinking globally and acting locally is centered. And that's super important.
Yes. I've got to see if it's so serendipitous that you said that, because in my intro class in undergrad, this time, 2012, I wrote an essay that was called "You're Only as Strong as Your Weakest Link." And it was like all about how, like, if we just lift up those who don't have the support that they need to thrive right now, then all of us as a result will be stronger. And I've always found it, like, humans are so fucking self-sabotaging. Like, it's just like, we will hold back our entire species because we do not want to build support for the folks who are not served under capitalism. It's just,
yeah, because whiteness is a system and it's a pyramid scheme. It's an MLM.
yes.
America is a business that was built on stolen land with stolen people. It is a business that could absolutely be dissolved. It could be dissolved we could start an entirely different system that centers all of the people that really need it. It's not that difficult, right? But because the systems of whiteness cause such deprivation as you move down that MLM and you get here and this bottom rung, that is necessary. Like, I need poor white people and poor people, very specifically poor white people, to realize like America needs a slave class because it was built on a slave class. There was never a better time in the world, well, not the world, but in America for capitalism, for free market capitalism, than enslavement. Labor, free labor, all profit. That is the ledgers of whiteness. So like, even when people are like, we need to get paid a minimum wage. Well, hey, let me tell you how your racism is creating this system. Like this 725, it's like the people that control that are like, well, it's better than free. You're getting something. And you guys agreed collectively that enslavement was okay. Because people always tend to, they lose that part of it, very specifically poor white people. Like, we didn't own slaves, we were poor. Yeah, I know, I get it, I understand. But you were able to work in the cobbler store, you were able to work in the iron mills, you were able to become police officers, you were able to participate in the capitalism. Enslavement was an economic system, and we're still in that economic system. Has not changed. It's just that they can't enslave people. But I promise you, if they could, they would.
Yeah.
Because $7.25 an hour, but people love to call it slave wages. And I'm like, that's not true. Enslaved people were not paid. Like, so when you're looking at it from that point, top down, you recognize, oh, you know what? $7.25 an hour, they think it's not too bad. Okay, if we raise it a little bit more, but you always need a slave class. You need people to be poor. You will never not be poor. There is no bootstrapping your way out of poverty. I really like how you entered this and said, I know too many people killed by poverty, because it is a system created. Poverty is manufactured, and it does kill people. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the symptoms of poverty that I grew up with: domestic violence, houselessness, addiction, like, and
All
for
of it.
for a long time growing up, it was like I saw them as separate things. And it was when I started to like connect these dots that I was like, oh no, this is all poverty.
Yeah.
And
poverty breeds violence in
exactly.
all of the ways.
Yep. And I, part of the reason I agree as far as like white folks should not lead anti-racism education. And that's part of the reason that I specifically try to talk about like white supremacist capitalism and my view of like being a poor white Appalachian. And I think the way that race specifically ends up coming into my work is that I'm trying to combat the rise of white nationalism in my people, because that's the other thing that like this pyramid scheme, I feel like not only do they need this class of poor white folks to like be the slave class, but they also need poor white folks to stay angry enough that like it's very easy for them to like be recruited into white nationalism. And so much of, I think Aaron actually like started first like following me and commenting on my stuff when I was talking about like, I need wealthy white liberals to realize that every time you denigrate and shit on poor white people, you're actually pushing them further towards white nationalism. And I'm out here trying to fight that shit. And like, you're making my job so much harder.
Yes, that's why for me it's healing work, right? Exactly. Because there's no way to just wake up and be like, I'm an anti-racist, I'm an ally, or whatever self-appointed term white people want to use. White progressive liberals quite often want to make up for themselves to cosplay, because again, you're not realizing the impact, right? Like I swear to God, I'm gonna make a graph for this. The impact of the hierarchies of whiteness is very real. And when you get down here to that bottom part, it becomes lateral violence. So here's like these upper white percent whites that you'll never get into, right? Like that is blue blood. That is old colonizer money and old They intermarry, they do all of that, and they keep it tight. You will never, ever, I don't care how white and wealthy, you will never. That's why they call people with new money nouveau riche. They still think of them as, it's not old money. Old
I'm
money,
the kind of poor that I've never even heard that term before.
I cleaned houses for 20 years.
Oh.
Amazing what you hear, learn, and the type of demographics you walk into. So you have old money, those are those blue bloods. You have old money, you have new money white, right? That's like, and new money white and old money is right there. And then, like, you keep coming down with the levels of capitalism because poor white people understand that, right? Now you have like those middle class white people that usually work themselves up, right? Because this is not old money that came from wealth. And it's not new money like the Jeff Bezos or those who invented anything. So this middle management white here, like these people, the supervisors of whiteness, because white women are gatekeepers of capitalism. These folks usually came from these poor white folks here. They're just like 2 generations from a trailer park.
Mm-hmm.
And they just don't, because it's a performance, right? It's a performance of wealth. That's what whiteness is. You get out, you talk a little bit better, right? It's why white people this is so hood, this is so ghetto, which is still anti-Black. I'm like, why can't it be so trailer park? Why are you not proud of your trailer park? Because the hood and the trailer ain't no different. It's right. Just white and Black. So like, why are you not proud of that? Like, I want to see white people in their like white trash t-shirts. Like,
yes,
I want to see it. I want to see the fucking pride. Like, I would love to see that, right? Like taking back that power and releasing the shame of being poor because it was created like that. So when you get down that pyramid scheme of whiteness and that hierarchy, you get to the bottom. And then it goes a whole spectrum, right? And these white people are so desperate to be seen, to be heard. Like, why am I not good enough for you? Why do you not care about me? Why have you left me? Right? Like, that's that ancestral pain that exists in poor white people. But we are on that spectrum, no matter what. I don't care if you're Black with money, you're still Black. And at the very end of that spectrum is the most unambiguously Black. It's the person I said to censor, right? And that lateral violence comes here. So while they're talking shit, doing all of these things, pushing these people down, these people here have zero power in whiteness. So it starts coming down the line. And it's like, who do I have power over? Well, my whiteness gives me power over these Black people. And this is the violence of whiteness right there. Right. Yep. All of this turns into lateral violence and they never pay attention to it. So middle management white people who are keeping these systems up, who have forgotten their own people, actually cause more harm to this person here. Because again, anti-Blackness and racism is literally what stops the liberation. It is. It's this scarcity mindset. It's this fear. And these people down here, those poor white people only have power here. And then when they see Black people getting educated, moving up in this area, though we're still Black, they can't understand that because they think that their whiteness is a ticket in. But I'm white, but they don't care about you. And that's why, for me, it needs to be healed, right? Like, it's a family issue. This is a family systems issue that we over here are impacted by because y'all need to get your shit together.
Yep. And so much shame, like when poor white folks see Black folks, Indigenous folks, other folks of color, like moving up the capitalist ladder, even though they're not necessarily moving up the ladder of whiteness. It's like so much more of that shame, like even confounded because whiteness is telling them like, there's something wrong with you because
it's a moral failing.
Exactly.
It's a moral failing. Then they'll use us like, so it's very interesting how I look at all of these things, right? Because for Black people, they use Asian people as the modern minority, right? Or white Jewish people as the model minority. So this is how they play against each other, right? And then with poor white people, they'll tell you, well, look at them. They're taking from you what should be yours, right? The immigrants, the Black people, the brown people, because this should be yours, white man.
They're still in our job, like the most visceral like example of that. Yeah.
Don't nobody want to work in Dollar General, fam. You don't even want to work there. You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't even want to work there. What the fuck makes you think I want to work there, right? Like, you don't have any jobs you don't have jobs. That's why you're poor. There's not even enough jobs for you guys to even work. Like, nobody's taking your jobs. You don't even have the ability, the skill set, and they ensure that you don't to get those jobs. Right. So it's a very intersectional need for healing because white supremacy is playing in everybody's face. And that moral failing and shame that comes with it is absolutely insane. I remember when my mom moved out to New Hampshire, we were living in the Bronx, right? We were poor as fuck in the Bronx, like cheese line poor, right? But my aunt was in a little bit of a better situation, right? Like we were in the South Bronx, she was in the North Bronx, right? Ooh, still, yeah. Still poor as fuck, right? We had all of the stereotypical Irish issues of drinking, fighting, all of the shit that goes along with colonization and how they just give us liquor and drugs to think about nothing, right? So grew up like that and all of the violence that poverty brings. And, then I had another aunt who moved to upstate New York. So she was super fancy white, right? Like, like these people are fucking crazy. So like I could watch it in my own life, right? Like I seen how my mother was like the bottom rung white trash. Like I could see that. Add to that, she had a Black husband and a Black kid. Oh, super trash. Super trash, right? Super trash. So I take on that shit with pride, right? Like, I'm like, yeah, like, oh, like my backyard, I'm like, it's super white trashy and I love it. There's fucking exercise equipment outside. There's a garden. There's a gazebo, kids' toys, sheds and shit. I'll pull anything. I park on my front lawn. like,
yes.
White trash, language. Baby. Like, and I really wish that they would take more pride in that, right? Like, because like me and my cousin laugh, like we have the blow up pools. We've just elevated. We have like white trashy with money, right? Like, but it's still the same. We have like the above ground pools. We do all of that, and I'm like, isn't it just awesome to sit around and see where we've come from? But I recall when my mom moved to New Hampshire, and she had an apartment and all that stuff. But then when she finally purchased something, it was a trailer. And it was in a trailer park. And I was like, oh my God, this can't be fucking happening. Like, we are bugging. And it was like, I love my mom. I miss her so much. And it was like the most trailer parky, white trashy. My mom was in a wheelchair. So it had like the fucking ramp. My stepfather is like smoking Marbreds with the oxygen on him, right? Like with the most Manchester accent ever. Their cat's name was Whitey. They had random cats and dogs. It was like,
I love it.
Glorious white trash, right? And I was like, oh God, we are it. That's it. That's who we are. That's it. So like, but like, so seeing that and watching and living in those situations that I was married and out of the house, but coming back and forth and that kind of stuff. But just watching even the treatment from people towards her. And I'm like, but she owns this. And like, she loves this. And she's like doing all this work in the community. So it really made me realize how much I'm like, nobody hates poor white people more than not poor white people. Nobody. No, Black people are not thinking about poor white people. We live rent free in poor white people's heads. Like, well, like we're not even thinking about y'all. And that is something that really, I love these conversations, right? Because like it needs to be, that is how you get class solidarity, is having very real conversations. And it has to be about racism as well. Because we're not the ones putting you in a trailer park. We're not the ones keeping you poor, fam. Like that's not us.
Yep.
We're just doing what we can. We're in the hood too. It's manufactured for us to be here. And more of us exist here than in that very narrowing pyramid. Yeah. And when we really realize that, right? Like when we really get down to the bottom, that's equity. That's equity. And dissolving the rest of that shit, we'd have an awesome life.
Yes. Yes. I love it's taken me, I mean, so my grandma, I've kind of watched my stepdad's mom, who I call my grandma because we have the same birthday. She was raising me before my mom married my stepdad. She's just awesome. But I watched her, she married a rich man after divorcing my dad's dad when she was like, like my dad was grown, like, and I was like, that you did it right, grandma. Like, go you. But she was the one, like, as I was growing up, who's literally training my accent out of me. It was like, don't say ain't, like, you can't, you sound stupid, like, you can't do that. People aren't going to take you seriously. The reason that they wanted me to go to college was because, like, that was going to be my path out of poverty, was to be the highly educated white person, right? Like, that was going to be it. And I did resent growing up here until I was in college and these pieces started to click together. And like, it wasn't until probably even the last like half decade that I was like, really, even after becoming a community organizer, that I was like, oh, this is who I am. Like, the reason I love community is because I am trailer trash. Like, otherwise I would just be like trying to separate myself from all of the other people, like all like the wealthy white folks do. And like, and now it makes me so like, I get so sad when people are like, oh, you don't sound like you're from here. And I'm like, I never left. Like, I've lived here my whole life. But it's like, that's what, like, besides the actual like literal killing us, like, that's what white supremacist capitalism does to us, is like it steals the pieces of us and like
all of the cultures, all of the culture out of it. Because Appalachian culture I find to be very interesting, very fascinating. I think you guys have a dope ass culture. I have a couple of friends that are Appalachians, right? Like I like Appalachian white folks because they kind of get it. Even though, again,
we're working on it.
The racism, I mean, but I expect racism and anti-blackness from white people, right? Like, white people are going to white. Like, so I expect that. So like, but the culture in and of itself, aside from the racism, is a really deep and beautiful culture, right? And like, yes, exactly. Like, white women are very much trained for hypergamy, right? Like, marry up, marry rich, get out of this, right? And wind up in these very unhappy spaces because the more you go up, the more you lose community. Remember that pyramid. It's less. It's not more. It's actually less. Because very similar to you is I realized like the most community I've ever felt was in poverty.
Because you have no choice, right?
And the abundance that happens in there, right? Like I explained, like I'm not that impoverished anymore. I'm nowhere near middle class, but I'm food stable, I'm house stable, I'm medical coverage, which for me was like, these are the things that I need in life, right? Like my kids have never worried about being hungry, lights off, or any of that kind of stuff. That is a major blessing. And that makes me successful. The rest of it, I don't care about. But I realized like, if I run out of sugar right now, I just ran out of sugar. I don't have sugar, which means that I'm responsible for getting sugar all on my own. That isolation that moving up brings you, where being poor in the Bronx in an apartment, oh, I got sugar because somebody in this building that I fuck with has sugar.
Yep.
So there's like this. That's why it's all shadow work. It's like when you start realizing, like actually the abundance is in community. The having more is in having the village, not in having more money. Because the more money you get, the less access you have to all of this abundance, to all of this community, because people have an expectation, right? Like when you fall into these nuclear family ideas, well, why doesn't your husband do it? Well, because he's not a mechanic, sir, and you are. So can you come over here and do this? Like, because in community, everybody pulls together for each other. And you only find that here.
Yep.
You don't find it as you move up those rungs. And I really hope that people start realizing that it's not more when you get up there. It's a lot less.
Yeah, exactly. You can pay for the aesthetic of community once you get up there, but it's not actually community. Even I'm working my way to where you are right now. Like I still consider myself poor because we are literally like, if we missed one single paycheck, like we would not be able to pay rent. We would not be able to pay our power bill.
Right. Oh yeah, no, I'm there, but my house is paid off. Right.
Yeah.
Like, because I do all my work on mutual aid, and trust me, like, and I leverage a lot of credit, right? Like, but I feel more secure than that, but
Yeah.
still nowhere near wealthy, right? Like,
Exactly. And I'm living in the first apartment. I mean, we don't have a ton of apartment complexes, like where it's more trailers than anything. And I'm living in the first apartment complex that I've ever lived in, but still able to find like that community because I'm like right there on the cusp, I think, with like a lot of these folks. And so there's like my diagonal upstairs neighbor is a single mom. And like I was like in the office building overhearing her talk about just struggles and like fears with the office manager. And I was like, hey, I got a husband who's 6 foot tall, like all of 200 and some pounds. Like if you need him to scare somebody off, like let me know. You can
right.
borrow him anytime. And then like we have each other's numbers now, and she'll be like, hey, I need help putting some like furniture together. Can like Chris come up here and help me? And I'm like, of course he can. Like
I
that's what we're
love
here
that.
for.
I love that for her. I love that. I love that for you. I love that. Okay, keep
And that's
going. I
how
want
it
to hear
should.
more.
I mean, that's just how it should. Like, that's nothing brings. I would rather know that I've got to go hit up the Feeding the Multitudes food distribution line to get food in my pantry, but also know that, like, if I need coffee, my neighbor Artie's like got some coffee that they're gonna bum me, and like we can
Right.
watch each other's dogs. I'd rather have that any day than have like a mansion that I pay some person to clean for me and like do my grocery shopping. It's just so like there's just so much more depth in surviving
So
in
much more.
community.
So much more. So much more love, abundance, beauty. And really, when we could dismantle those systems of whiteness in our brain, that this is something that's supposed to be successful. Because when I think about it, I'm like, how is it supposed to be successful? The highest suicidal rates are wealthy white men. This system is killing wealthy white men too. When I say liberation for all, I mean them too.
Yeah.
Because that is who's killing themselves the most. Wealthy white men.
Killing themselves and then killing the rest of us too.
Right. Like, so then, like, it's obviously that's not joy. That's not happiness, right? These are the people who are jumping out of fucking office buildings. Like, the pressure is ridiculous to maintain because, again, it's a performance. There's no substance. There's no depth. Only thing that matters is how much you make. Where were you educated? Like, where do you live? What's your zip code? What clothes do you have on? It's like, that's exhausting to perform every day. Exhausting, right? It's just exhausting. And so when the system can be dismantled in that sort of way, they get free too. Like, I don't ever aspire to be that wealthy. I look at money like access.
Yeah.
Right. Like, unfortunately, in a capitalistic system, I need it. So like, I'm not opposed to getting it. Right. Like, I'm like, yes, get it. But like, there's no way to get there without exploiting these people. Like, there's just not. Right. Like, so it's like, I have this huge tug of war with myself. Like, but if I had money, what I could do with it and all of the things. And I'm like, you know what? Instead of that, just destroy the system. Right? Reframe your mind, reframe your thoughts, because up there is not better. It's not. They make it seem like that, right? They put this picture forth of white America, 2.5 children and a dog with a white picket fence, while 72% of white Americans are poor as fuck with shitty fucking dental care, dying every fucking day of an opioid crisis. But yeah, let's say that this is what white America looks like. It's a lie. It's a lie from the pit of hell that we all buy into. Like, that's not what white America looks like. It's not. White America looks like these pictures that they paint of Black America. Oh, it's so violent. The drug, like, white folks too.
Yep, exactly.
White folks too. The majority of white folks, like per capita, Black people are more successful, as according to these systems, right? But like, the face, they're playing with us, and that is something that we need to recognize, right? Because so when you put this face of white America being this nuclear family, 2.5 kids, a dog, the picket fence in the suburbs, right? Like, it makes Black people want to aspire to that. Like, we could mimic that, which we can't because we're still Black. Like, in this system, we're still Black. I got a husband, some kids, and pets, still black. Like none of that shit is going to change, right? Like none of that is going to change the marginalization that exists for me underneath a white supremacist regime. I'm still black. And then the poor white people have this vision and feel like trash because they can't get to it. And that bootstrapping, well, you morally failed because you can have that. No, you can't. No, you can't.
Yep.
Because you're a part of the slave class, fam, and they need you so they can lie with this little middle management whites.
Yep.
Yeah, that's my summation.
Yep. I think one of the first videos I think that someone tagged you in on that I made, and someone like tagged you in the comments. Because I remember being like, oh my God, Desiree Stevens is like commenting on my content. Was I referred to it as the myth of the ideal form of whiteness. And I was like, they keep poor people trying to achieve this myth. And that is why poor white people trying to achieve this myth of whiteness. And that is why poor white people like direct this lateral violence at brown folks, because they think at least I'm white and I'm closer to this ideal form of whiteness than you. Not. Exactly. Yeah. No. And I so appreciate you using the word performance. And it's making me think about your live the other day where we were talking, I think you were on with Dr. Kim, and we were talking about neurodivergence. And I was saying, like, I feel like neurodivergence is actually just divergence from what benefits capitalism. And it's interesting that we use the word masking for autistics, and you're using the word performance. And it's almost like you have to mask your natural humanity to fucking succeed under capitalism.
You do. It's all a dance, because like when you think about America as a business, you recognize that a business, like I was a business major, business and marketing. A business needs to always be selling and always be closing. This is marketing. America is a business. It's a big ass business. That's it. Everything's for sale. Your social security number is absolutely like an account number for them. Like your birth certificate is a bond certificate. It reminds them, okay, this person should live till about 70 years old. This, okay, from this demographic, from this test, all of the school testings, it just lets them know on their ledgers how much a person can earn for them in capitalism. It's why we don't care about disabled people. Because on a ledger, this is a liability.
That's an expense. Yep.
This person, exactly. This person is going to cost us money, not make us money. So when you're performing, when you're selling something, you got to sell that dream. You got to sell white suburbia to white people. You got to sell, and everything's for white people. The system was never created for us. We were never supposed to be a part of society. We were supposed to be enslaved today. That's why I'm saying there always needs to be a slave class. It was built with the idea that intergenerational, that's what makes chattel slavery so different. This country, this business was built with the idea that they would always have a slave class. We were never meant to be free. So for them, they would always have us enslaved, working for nothing. It was never meant like, hey, we're going to just do this. That would have been indentured servitude, like they did to the Irish or any of the other Europeans, right? 7 years, you get free. Chattel slavery changed because it became intergenerational. The people that you birthed were property of these people, and we're supposed to always be that way. Again, racism and anti-Blackness gets in people's way. Like, so because we did not remain that slave class, got to redo that. Got to figure that out. So all of these rules were created for white people to keep y'all in line. So they selling to you, right? Like if you're talking about who's the customer of America, it's white people. So when they're selling to white people, and they sell to poor white people, because that's the majority, are poor white people, they have to sell you this beautiful picture. This is what you could do. That's the bootstrap, right? If you work hard enough, if you do the right things, if you speak the right way, get educated, marry the right person, you too could have this. Look at this. Look at this beautiful, that 1950s. And I'm like, she was high, bro. Look at the ads from 1950. Like they were selling white women benzos.
Yep.
Now mom can make breakfast.
And what's in that coffee cup of mom's?
Right. If I need to have heroin to make breakfast, I'm probably not happy. And then I'm just saying, if I need to be having drinks at 11 o'clock, I'm not happy. But here, let me sell you this beautiful dream. And why are you not working hard enough for it? Well, because look at the Negroes. They're so violent and their drug use. And you sell them this picture and you sell the immigrants coming through. Look at what they're taking from you. It's all selling. It's all selling. And once poor white people wake up to the fact that you're being sold a fucking lie, it's snake oil. They are snake oil salesmen. You will never get there. I don't give a fuck if one of y'all made it out of the trailer park. I don't care if 5. They need a slave class because it was built, this business was built with that level of an economic system in mind. And the business has never been destroyed. The business has not been dissolved. So it's still operating from its same operation module. That's how businesses work.
Yep.
That's it.
I feel like I'm in church. I'm just like, keep talking because I'm here for the sermon. I don't even, you leave me speechless.
Well, thank you, darling.
But it is, I mean, it's so like I've known for at least most of my working adulthood that capitalism was not the way. But it was not until I really started to look into, like I said, like even my own Appalachian history, just starting with Blair Mountain. When I went through that, like I made it all the way back to colonization and then started a 4-part. Okay, perfect. Yeah, we'll log off here. Started a 4-part series called The Race and Labor Rabbit Hole. And like, I just had to start with colonization because I was like, race and labor, it's all like, that's all it is. That's like, this country's like a bunch of shareholders from Europe were like, we're going to invest in some boats and send some people over there. Y'all figure out how to make money for us on this land and let us know when you do it.
It's a business venture.
Yeah, exactly.
And a hostile takeover to the indigenous people.
Yes. And birthed on violence from the very beginning, just murder on murder for the sake of profiting. Some people that none of us even have seen or know the names of, like on a whole different continent.
Yeah. Wild.
Wild. It is.
The rabbit hole. It goes so deep.
Yes. This has been such an amazing conversation. I want to let you go eat some food. And I really just want to talk to you again whenever you have the time, though. And before I wrap, I also just want to let folks know who are listening, like Desiree has a Ko-Fi page, just like our podcast has. So the equivalent of a Patreon. Please check it out. I'll drop the link in the show notes for this episode too, so folks can find it easily. The Makeshift Happen community. You can join Desiree and myself and lots of other people who are in community working on healing ourselves and supporting each other in our healing journeys. You can access it for free, I think, but I would encourage folks to throw in
mutual aid.
Yeah, a couple bucks in that Ko-Fi. And then also, if this is something that you want to work with Desiree on your own, like if you feel called right now from this conversation, you're like, wow, there's something in here I need to unpack. Desiree does one-on-one sessions where she supports folks with that work and is brilliant at it. So I'll drop all of those links in the show notes for today. And is there anything that you were hoping to say that you didn't get to say?
There's always more to say, right? Because I absolutely enjoy having conversations. But no, you nailed it, right? Everything that I do is on my website. It's the same name, Desiree B. Stevens with a PH. So yeah, and if you go and if somebody does go and they're like, I can't afford the $75 an hour thing, I have a pay what you can link. My website says text me. So by all means, text me and say, hey, I really would like to talk to you. I can't afford that. I'll send you that link for booking because that's the goal is accessibility and equity for me.
Yes. Thank you for the work that you do, the wisdom that you share, and the light you bring to the world. It's really what we all have. Up today's episode of Rednecks Rising. Thanks so much for tuning in, y'all. Lord willing and the creek don't rise. We'll see you again next week.